Greetings, everyone. My name's Larry Williams, and I'm the director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, here at Virginia Commonwealth University. CARMA is an interdisciplinary center that I established in the School of Business 10 years ago when I came here, aimed at promoting research methods and advancing research methods. As you may know, we do a series of short courses in May, and we are just finishing up our third year of our CARMA Consortium webcast program, and I'm pleased to welcome you on April 18th, 2008 to our Meet the Methodologist session. And our guest today is Dr. Michael Pratt. Michael is currently at the University of Illinois, but is excited about moving to Boston College in the fall. Michael is here to give a webcast lecture this afternoon, and we're going to chat with him to get his views about various aspects of research methods and organizational studies. So, Mike, welcome to CARMA.
Thank you.
Let's begin with sort of a general question about how you got interested in research methods.
Okay. Since we're going to be talking about qualitative research methods, I'll start by asking you a question.
Okay.
So what do you mean by research methods?
Ooh, by research methods, I guess I would say it's any type of scientifically constrained process through which we gather data in a variety of forms with the objective of making some type of inference that goes beyond the data.
Yeah. So why science is critical then for methods then?
Yes, I think I added the term science. Are scientists?
It's science. You said it was a scientific.
Well, I use the term scientific to kind of capture that, I guess, the sense that there are some rules of the game that we put in place that help us be more confident in the inferences that we make as we attempt to go beyond our data to making theoretical kinds of developments.
The reason why I ask is because what kind of drew me to qualitative methods in general is that we write a lot of books, we write a lot of things about a lot of concepts, but sometimes when we talk to people out in the field, how they view things are a little bit different. So if I looked up in a research methods book, it may have said something as general as, it's how we do our research, it's the practice. But everybody, people have different perspectives on it, different values, and what I like about, what attracted me to qualitative research in general, and I'll get to the methods part soon, is just talking to people and finding out where they're coming from. Because I think it's hard to advance what we know. I think a lot of times we impose knowledge on other people. But I think part of the whole knowledge learning process is finding out where people are at and getting their perspective on it.
So would my answer then, I was trying to be general so that it would embrace both qualitative and quantitative approaches? Do I get a pass with that objective?
I think it depends on what qualitative researchers you're talking to. So I think there would probably be some qualitative researchers that would say, well, scientific probably denotes a positivistic stance, and so you have to be careful because there's some, qualitative methods is such a broad range. And I'm probably closer to the post-positivist, interpretivist arena, but there are folks that are have very different assumptions about what it means to actually, what methods mean. And what the purpose is, and whether things like replicability or validity are even either possible or desired. So I think I got interested in research methods because qualitative research methods in particular, I think maybe it's true of all, is very much of a apprenticeship model. So it's difficult to learn it without actually learning from somebody specifically. You can read books about it, but unless you actually do it, it's very difficult to learn the process. And I really didn't start out to be a methodologist. It's kind of, I did qualitative research, and I wanted to do it better. I started out doing a lot of things. I learned from some very gifted people, Anat Raffaelli, Jane Dutton, Martha Feldman, all have really helped in my formative years to learn about how to do qualitative methods. But then at some point I wanted to, kind of expand. Part of it was I was asked to review qualitative research. And I'm like, okay, well, I know how I learned it, but what does the broader field have to say? And so really got interested in learning much more about what are the different assumptions behind different qualitative methods. I was mostly taught in doing interview methods, but I didn't know a lot about hermeneutics, narrative analysis. And so partly to be a better researcher and also to be a better reviewer and now editor. So
Yeah.
I kind of got, those are kind of the motives for getting into research methods.
Okay, and so while you were in graduate school, was there a particular course that you took that kind of sparked this interest, or was particularly helpful as you followed this interest that you just mentioned?
Yeah, actually it's, ironically, multivariate analysis with Frank Andrews was actually, I think, probably the methods class that turned a light on for me in a lot of different ways. He was a very gifted teacher that helped us look at what the logic was behind the methodology, so why regression and ANOVA are similar, and why it's different than cluster analysis. And I started to learn that, you know, a lot of what qualitative methods do is very similar to what people do with cluster analysis, with factor analysis, and we're trying to figure out what kind of things go together and what things don't. And we're doing it in an interview format.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, what multivariate time was a very rigorous way of thinking. And that really has helped me to be a qualitative researcher because it helps me, I think, when I write, and it helps me in terms of how I design my qualitative studies, to kind of know what some of the thought processes were really helpful. And I actually, when I have students who want to do qualitative research, I said, make sure you're also a really good quantitative researcher too. Because the logic, I think it's a good way to think. If you can know how to think well, I think you're halfway there.
Okay, and since we're talking about graduate student days, as best you can recall, were there any particular challenges you faced in learning about research methods or statistics as a graduate student?
Yeah, I think a couple. I think for the quantitative analysis, it's just finding people who were could teach you about, like Frank Andrews, it teaches you the logic behind why you do things and not just the mechanics of you do A, B, C, D, and E. I think it's difficult sometimes to know, especially as a doctoral student, not only what you have to do, but why it's important to do those things. It's kind of like driver's ed. So they say, okay, I knew that I have to adjust my mirror, I know I have to put on my seatbelt, but unless you're actually out driving, some of the stuff they teach you in driver's ed can sound silly, and you don't really know how to prioritize. Yeah, this is really important, and this you should do, but not so much. And I think finding classes where somebody could remember what they were like when they were first doing it and say, you know, I know you're going to think this is really dumb, but this is actually pretty important. I think that was critical. I think for qualitative methods, we didn't really have a qualitative methods class. I ended up taking one with Rafe Ezekiel, who was not in the psychology department at the time. Being a psychologist and doing qualitative methods was an interesting mix. And so partly you really had to be proactive and entrepreneurial to find both people to work with and to find classes that you can learn the methodology.
Yep. Mike, many in our audience might know that you have considerable experience as a reviewer and action editor for both research methods and substantive papers. And I'm wondering, can you comment on what you see as some of the most frequent limitations or shortcomings of the papers that you review?
Sure. I'll talk a lot about this later, but let me give you a brief rundown. I think with methods papers, I think especially for qualitative methods, because we don't really have a standard way. First of all, there's so many different methodologies, but there's really not a standard practice in most of any of them. It's very difficult to kind of make improvements on it because it's hard to know what is idiosyncratic and what is going to be helpful to a lot of different kinds of people. And I find when I review methods papers for qualitative, I want to know what's the contribution and how can this be relevant to a relatively broad audience. Folks like Karen Locke and Karen Goldman-Biddle, they know how to do it. It's fantastic. But having written one methods paper, it's very difficult. I find it's very difficult to do. I think more generally with qualitative research is people, I think, sometimes are afraid to show data. I see wonderful analysis. People will have done 6 or 7 case studies that would be longitudinal. And when I read the paper, I see none of the data because I think they're trying to keep it within a 40-page limit. And so they tell you everything it's all their own interpretation of what they saw and not a lot of you don't hear a lot of the voice of the people that is there. I think with any paper, qualitative or quantitative, there's often difficulty aligning theory and data. So theory data, I almost take it as a given that your first draft, the theory and data will probably be misaligned. It happens in my own work. But I think what differentiates kind of papers that have potential versus not is when you can actually see some of the data there and say, okay, there might be a story here, there might be something we can work with. And people who don't have that, I think, have a hard time getting to the next, the rise and resubmit stage.
Yeah. Mike, do you have a favorite research methods book that either influenced you greatly or upon which you rely regularly?
Sure. I think when I started, I had Miles and Huberman next to me. I also like Strauss and Corbin even better than Glaser and Strauss. Both of those books are really nice because they, for a beginning qualitative researcher, they really take you step by step and give you some idea about what to do. The book I rely on a lot now is actually Karen Golden-Biddle and Karen Locke's book on composing qualitative research, because it's one of the few books that really helps you think about writing up, because you have all this data, and one of the biggest challenges for qualitative researchers is how do you get all this data into a 40-page paper, and they do a nice job with that, and I go back to that quite a bit to learn some of their tricks.
Yeah. Kind of trying to take a big picture perspective. Are there areas, topical areas within the fields of qualitative research methods that you think we do a particularly good job with or a particularly bad job with?
I think we're getting better with some perspectives. I think we're pretty good with cases. There's been a fair amount written. If you want to do case analysis, there's a lot of books you can read. I think grounded theory we do very well with. I think we're doing better with narrative analysis, but we're still early on. But I think in general, we haven't been as reflective, I think, as qualitative researchers. We haven't done a lot on thinking about methods. I think we've depended a lot on, and there's some great books out there, but you don't see a lot of articles or a lot of shorter pieces that really, I think, help, especially for doctoral students and people early on, just to help them figure out how to do the methodology. So I haven't seen as much really reflective work on the methods, I think, that they have in other areas.
Do you have any career advice that you would like to offer to aspiring methodologists or even aspiring substantive researchers?
Be a good storyteller. I think especially if you're strong in methods, you have such an advantage over a lot of other people who aren't very good methodologically. But then the next step is to be able to tell a good story. I know that some people weigh these. You're either good methodologically or your paper's interesting, and I think it's a false dichotomy. It really can't be an either or. It has to be a both and. And so that would be my one recommendation: is be a good storyteller.
Okay. Mike, are there any common misperceptions you think that quantitative researchers have about those who use qualitative approaches?
Yeah. I think there's several, but I'll point out three. One of them is people tend to think that qualitative research is not empirical, forgetting the fact that empirical actually means it's based on observation. And a lot of qualitative methods are more empirical than, for example, a survey where you actually really don't observe much. I think the fact that it's a methodology, I think some people don't realize that there is still some belief that all qualitative methods is I'm going to give an interview and I'm going to transcribe it and I'm going to kind of take quotes out of it and put it in a paper, and that's all there is to it. And so they don't realize there's a lot of rigor involved in actually doing qualitative methods. And I think the third big fundamental misunderstanding is that it's methods, that there's actually more than one. And so they think all qualitative methods is grounded theory. They think all qualitative methods is case studies, not realizing the huge diversity of methodologies out there.
Do you feel like we've made progress in organizational studies in the use of mixed methods approaches to our research?
Yes and no. I think certainly what I like is that people are being a little more innovative. It used to be that it was the standard, you do a qualitative study and then you do the quantitative follow-up. I've seen very interesting papers now that start with surveys, figure out what can they not understand about the surveys. They may get a finding that they don't understand, and then they follow up with qualitative methods. And so I think people are more creative about the order that they do it in. I'm doing a study right now. We have a couple qualitative studies and a couple quantitative studies. We did quantitative, qualitative, quantitative. And I think that in that area, I think people have really have gotten much better. I think in the area we haven't is that a lot of times that some of these mixed methods papers don't do a really good job at the qualitative part. They put a couple of interviews in, they think that, okay, now it's a mixed methods paper. And I think people need to realize and I'll talk about this afternoon, some people really believe that they shouldn't go together. I'm not one of those. I think in certain circumstances you can, but I think there's some people who really don't think that the assumptions underlying them are so incompatible that they really shouldn't be in the same paper.
Okay, and just a last question, Mike. What changes have you seen in the area of qualitative methods as used by organizational researchers over the past 15 years?
I think probably the biggest change is an embracing of just a broader set of perspectives. Going on, I think some people refer to it as a post-positivist perspective, which means I grew up being a positivist, and I realized there's some problems with this, so we do qualitative methods to kind of fix some things. And there's a lot of people, especially I think early people in the field, like Anand Rafieli was trained as a lab researcher and he does qualitative research. And I think a lot of people have come out of qualitative being frustrated with some aspect of quantitative research. But I think we have people now that are coming in for different reasons, and I think we have a much broader range of why people do it. Some people who totally reject positivism. Some people who are, I think, just more, it's just a broader scope. And I really, the other thing I think in organizational and in general, I think it's interesting this whole narrative turn that we're taking, that that's becoming more popular.
Yeah. Well, Mike, we appreciate you taking the time to come and give the lecture this afternoon as part of our consortium webcast program. And we also thank you for sharing your thoughts on research methods in this Meet the Methodologist session.
Great, thanks.